What is up, Nico Nation? This is the Draft Guys podcast with Peyton and Nico. And guess what this is? This is us wrapping up an incredible 2026 NFL draft cycle. I'm your host, Niko Chambers, Nico the Draft Guy. You can call me alongside my co-host, Pete Dunn. This is Division Draftables, our seasonal NFL news series where we highlight all 32 NFL teams and their journeys throughout the offseason, of course, panning out towards training camp and preseason football. This is episode 70 of this cycle, which is unbelievable. Episode 8 of this series, AFC West edition. It's going to be a blast. Pete, on how's it going?
I'm good, man. Really excited for this one. A lot of expectations in this division. A lot of teams that are really vying for a Super Bowl. Three of them are really excited for what they have in store this year, and one is really excited about the rebuild process that is undergoing right now. And so, a lot of different angles, a lot of different teams really excited for this one.
It's going to be a blast to see who wins this division. It's a pack one. We'll start off with one of the lower teams in the division. It'll be the Las Vegas Raiders. Pete Dun's giving it a C plus. I'm giving it a B. I think we're far off. So Pete Dunn, you got to tell me why C plus.
Yeah, obviously this is the head mark of the entire draft with the Fernando Mendoza pick, the number one overall pick, the number one quarterback in a lot of people's eyes. And so um, I think that's the main thing that's carrying this is, I really didn't love the pick. I didn't really think that he was worth that number one overall selection. I was very clear on that throughout most of the cycle. So was it bad? No. Will it work? Maybe. I like the Kirk Cousins signings. And then I didn't really love how they supplemented him after, right? You supplemented the team well, but Stukes, your second overall pick, a guy that you and me both really liked out of Arizona, I think was a good pick, but defensively, right? Kieran Crawford, defense, right? Trey Zune, not really going to impact the roster this year. And then McCoy, defense. Washington, good pick, but then defense, and then defense again at the end of the draft. So it's a lot of defense. You got a young quarterback, surround the quarterback with talent, right? Pour into that offensive side of the ball. And so I don't know. I feel iffy about it. It wasn't my favorite, that's for sure.
I think for me, the thing that's weighing it towards a B, I think, is the Jermod McCoy pick. I think you have
Yeah.
some things you want to say about it, but I think just getting that value, no matter if they stumbled upon him or not in round four, whether the injury's there, I think the injury is going to clear over time. And I think that we've seen trends like this where the Will Johnsons of the world, they've happened and then they recover from the injury and they're kind of good. And it's like, oh, well, we kind of knew that coming in. Why didn't we take him in round two, three, or four? I understand if he's not a round one pick. I think the Raiders stumbled upon a superstar at that position. I love the Mike Washington pick. I love Mike Washington throughout this cycle. We were both very high on him. He fits. They did kind of throw away those last four picks, but around five, six, and seven picks, we understand it. We'll move on here to really what the depth chart is. And I think the biggest glaring thing that pops out to me is what they did in free agency. So, Pete, I mean, they spent $281 million. They got some good guys. They filled some good holes, especially that linebacker slot. How are you looking at this defense after free agency and then, of course, what they supplemented in the draft?
Yeah, I think the big thing was free agency was just kind of elevating the floor of this defense, right? You're not looking to win a championship this year. You're not looking to draft superstars. You're not looking to overpay for individual players that aren't going to be here for a long time. And so they got a lot of shorter contracts, right? They got a lot of guys that are on shorter term contracts that might not be here for a long time, but you're looking to build in the draft and you're looking to supplement in free agency, and that's really what they did.
I got all those contracts right here. Linderbaum, they brought him in 3 years, 81 million. Kwity Paye, 3 years, 48 million. Of course, bringing in Quay Walker for that 3 year, 40.5 million. Kirk Cousins was the crazy 5 year, 172 million. Up to that, I don't think it's going to be that. I think he'll be out probably earlier than that. Of course, the Kobe Dean, the 3 year, 36 million. And then Jalen Naylor, of course, 3 year, 35 million. So a lot of these 3 year deals, a lot of these things that supplement. The thing that stands out to me is that Naylor happened to be the only guy they brought in to this terrible wide receiver room. And we compared it to the Dolphins, which I think they did a better job than this Raiders team. So
Yeah.
this would be the 32nd ranked wide receiver unit in the NFL, in my opinion. Am I far off on that, Pete? How do you feel about them going into the season?
The receiver room strictly is absolutely awful. It is the worst in the NFL. Not only that, it's one of the worst we've ever seen, really. I think Jack Besh was overdraft last year and didn't produce the way he should have. Trey Tucker, incredibly one-dimensional. Jalen Naylor is the only guy that can really play receiver, and he was a wide receiver three last year, right? And so the thing that helps, which is tough if you want to put it in this equation or not, They have who I think is the best tight end in the NFL, and that's Brock Bowers, right? So he is a receiving tight end. He's going to do what they do in the receiving game. He's going to be the number one target in this offense. He is that alpha number one receiver. So if you have that, if you don't quantify that, though, this is an awful receiving room.
I mean, Michael Mayer is also a good tight end. Ian Thomas is
Yeah.
also very serviceable too. So they got good tight ends. It's just like,
Yeah.
man, are those guys going to play a slot role? I don't think so.
Yeah.
I don't know what's going on. We'll talk about really the offensive line serviceability, if you will. They bring in Linderbaum, they bring in Spencer Buford. Other than that, they did nothing for the tackles, which I thought that they really would. So how do you feel about this offensive line for Mendoza or Kirk Cousins or whoever's starting this year?
I actually feel pretty good about it, right? Like I think Colton Miller was always the one. He was the one guy on this line that like he's a lock, right? And you love to have the left tackle position figured out, right? JPJ at right guard. I know he played some center at some points last season. Like you like what you see out of him. Was really eye on him in that 2024 cycle, right? And then Linderbaum, you obviously pay because he's the best center in the NFL, and so you bring him in. That's three spots on that offensive line that you have figured out. DJ Glaze has been really up and down the last few years. I actually was interested to see if they were going to turn to Charles Grant at right tackle at some point. Was excited to see if he was going to maybe play guard. I would not be shocked. I had him as a guard coming out last cycle. Could for sure see him playing at left guard by the end of the season. It's a good offensive line, especially for a young quarterback learning. I think they have a good setup in front of him.
I think this is a super underrated secondary, especially when you add Stukes, which I don't really know where he's going to play. We'll talk about that in a second. Like, is he going to play safety? Is he going to play nickel? Is he going to play corner? He can kind of do it all, kind of roam. He's probably better as that roam, kind
Yeah.
of deep safety, but they have him as the nickel back here. Maybe that can work. Of course, Jermod McCoy and Eric Stokes is going to be a good one. And then they bring in Teron Johnson. So you have Jeremy Chin already. Like Pete, how do you feel about this corner safety room, this nickelback? Like, how do you feel about it?
Look, if all works out well and Jermod McCoy's healthy and Darian Porter takes that step that we've expected to, this could be one of the best young corner duos we have in the NFL. Like truly, it could absolutely be that. Jermod McCoy was a top 10 player for me this cycle. It's not a fluke. Darian Porter was a guy last year who we knew was going to take some time to settle in, but was the CB1 for this team by the end of the year last year. So there's real upside there. There's real upside with this team. I like the secondary a lot.
Of course, they keep Max Crosby on this roster, so you have a great player there. Of course, you added those linebackers. It's going to be super interesting to see what this Vegas Raiders team has really in store in this kind of loaded division. We'll move on here to Pete Dunn's five.
Yeah, my favorite pick is going to be Mike Washington. I like him down the board, and obviously the main thing and what you alluded to earlier is the Jermon McCoy pick, right? The number 9 player on my board. You take it 115. Sounds like a really good value. I think they stumbled into that one. Truly, I think that you kind of sometimes in the NFL you draft players and you get lucky if they're actually that good, right? Taking Jermon McCoy at 115, I'm not going to give you any flowers for that, right? I'm not going to give you credit when you could have taken him in the third or the second round if you felt convicted about it. They're going to luck into that if he turns into a really good player. Absolutely think he will be. Mike Washington's going to be my favorite pick. My draft diamond is going to be Stukes. I think he's a really good player. I was very impressed with him at Arizona. We had talked multiple times about him before being a real contributor in the secondary. And then year one impact, I think it's going to be Mendoza. I think he's going to be the guy down the road. Kirk will, I think, should definitely start. I think they're going to plan on doing that. It would shock me if, by Thanksgiving, Fernando Mendoza is not the starting quarterback, though.
100%. I think Stukes is a really good football player. Massive overdraft, if you will. They took him before Cisse and some of the other guys. Obviously, Chris Johnson was probably that other big reach, but with McCoy not going, Avion Terrell having that fall, he was like the third or fourth corner if you're valuing him as a corner. I think he's more of a safety, but you
Yeah.
never know. My favorite pick is, of course, going to be McCoy. When you stumble upon a top 15 talent like I had him, I just think it's hard to not put him on this list for the best value and
For
my
sure.
favorite pick. I think year one impact, of course, is going to be Mendoza. I do think that it will be interesting. It makes sense for Kirk Cousins to start. I'm interested to see what kind of will happen with that, with this Kubiak offense, what they kind of give him. We were talking about Stooks just a second ago. He's going to be my top sleeper. So, Pete, I'll give you the floor to talk about this. Give me your best case for the Raiders in 2026. What is the biggest thing you're looking to watch?
I think the main things here is you want to see McCoy healthy. I think that's the main thing. You want to see some of this younger talent start to take over that secondary. Darian Porter take his evolution stage in this second year, and Jeremiah McCoy come back healthy and get his feet underneath him. I think you want to see Genty turn to the form that we saw last year. This is a much improved offensive line. And then you want to see a healthy amount of growth from Mendoza. And, you cannot expect this to be perfect. There is no world where I could come on here and confidently say the only way this year's a success is if Mendoza wins Rookie of the Year, or if Mendoza, throws for 30 touchdowns and 6 interceptions. Like that's not going to happen, right? If you see flashes though, and you see him with a really bad receiver room, and kind of is getting his feet in a really complicated system, like if you see him show some flashes and be able to go through some read progressions and throw over the middle, which was my number one critique with him. If you can see him take those steps, I think that's a massive, massive win.
I think it'll be super interesting. They're slated at 5.5 on the over-under totals. We'll get into that a little bit later in this episode, but we'll move to a team that exceeded all expectations last year, and now they're tasked with rebuilding for it. And I don't think they did the best job in their draft. They were limited, of course, because they traded for Jalen Waddle. They traded a first, a third, and a fourth. That was their original picks. Then with that second round pick that they had of their own, they traded back into the third round to take Tyler Onyedem. So I don't know how to feel about it. I don't think it was very good. I don't think it was much value. You see the picks, they only had 7 picks. They did very little with the picks, very little of the importance. We'll look at the depth chart a little bit later. But Pete Dunn, give some hope to the Broncos fans if there is any, or just tell us about how you feel about this draft.
Yeah, not super excited about this draft. I like the way you phrased it. They blew a lot of picks here. The important thing when you're looking at this graphic is half of this draft class is seventh round picks. And so it's really hard to gauge that. You can't say like, oh, I don't recognize anybody because, seventh round picks, those rarely, rarely, rarely hit. And so this is a two-man class for me. Jonah Coleman, I think, is an awesome change of pace back for Harvey. In a perfect world, he's the Thunder, Harvey's the Lightning, and it's a very good combo between the two of them. And then Justin Jolie, he's kind of that weapon, that tight end weapon that he's been looking for, that Sean Payton knows how to use. In a perfect world, they know how to use him, right? And he gets that use out of that tight end position. It also wouldn't shock me if, neither of these guys really catch on. And the end of this season, we're looking at this draft class and like, yeah, probably should have been a little lower than a C.
100%. I think that their first pick, of course, Tyler Onyedem. I think the big thing that stands out to me, they took him 66th overall. If you really wanted to go defensive tackle, why not go get Big Dom Orange? He was there at 82nd overall, is where he went. Darrell Jackson Jr. went at 103. Caleb Proctor went at 104. So if you're looking at guys to really fit, of course, we'll look at their depth chart and really what they have. They have the nose tackle spot open. DJ Jones is getting older. You could have put Dom Orange there, would have been a really good fit. Darrell Jackson could have played there too if you really wanted a hybrid guy, which is probably would have been a perfect fit for Caleb Proctor. But the big thing that stands out on the list is that, like some of the other teams, like I guess I'll say the Jaguars, there's very little turnover on this, I guess, starting lineup all across the board. Even in free agency, they did absolutely nothing. So that begs the question, like, Pete, how do you feel about where this roster is at, and what are your hopes really for the next season?
Yeah, I mean, the really intriguing thing is that, even with the Jaguars, you saw like that front line, the first starters, there wasn't anything new, but you saw a lot of backups. Like, look at the second line on this graph. Like, look at the two deep. The backups are the same from last year. They only replaced a left guard and a defensive end. That's the only thing they added outside of Jalen Waddle. And so it really is the same roster from last year. It's going to be really interesting to see if they can make that change. The good news is that you made it really far in the playoffs last year, right? And you were one of the best teams in the NFL, and I think rightfully, really at the top of that AFC last year. And so there's a lot of hope. Bo Nix continue to elevate. I think Jalen Waddle added with Cortland Sutton is going to be really, really great. And so, you may not have added, starters in other places, but you added what I think is, a receiver that has top five, top 10 upside in the NFL.
Let's talk about some of the receivers they did add, as they have now a jumbled up tight end room with about 4 guys who could start. You have Troutman, you have Ingram, you have Joe Lee, you have Bentley, kind of the same type of receiving guys, not really blocking tight ends. Of those guys, can you give us what you think their roles will be and how they will the target share will look for them?
Yeah, Troutman's going to be more of your every down tight end. I think you're right. They're mostly receiving tight ends, but he's the one that I trust the most to play in line. Ingram is very much a weapon, slot weapon move receiver that you get in yak situations. And Justin Jolie, we had conversations before. I genuinely almost put him as a receiver on my receiver rankings when I was doing tight ends. And so absolutely think he's going to be utilized really well in the tight end game. Slot receiver, going to be used in motion. Evan Ingram is aging. Justin Jolie is the younger version of the way they used him.
You got five running backs in this room who have been used in years. Of course, you add Jonah Coleman to the list. How do you think that this target share, this touches share will look come week one? What are you expecting with the J.K. Dobbins coming back from injury and, of course, R.J. Harvey?
Yeah, J.K. Dobbins, the big thing with him is he's always been injured. We've always had injury conversations with him, and now he's starting to get up there in age. And so R.J. Harvey, obviously the rookie last year, he is very much the passing down running back, the third down running back. Jonah Coleman is going to be more your in between the tackles, kind of the power guy. I'm not sure if J.K. Dobbins is going to stay healthy enough to be the number one throughout this year, but R.J. Harvey is the only guy that I'll give it to you this way. If I'm drafting in fantasy, R.J. Harvey's the only one I'm looking at in this room.
Makes total sense. I got to ask you, Pete Dunn, is there a weak spot of this Broncos defense? I know it was lethal. It's up there with the Texans. It's up there with the Seahawks.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is that interior pass rush. If I'm going to be nitpicky, I don't think they're causing a lot of pressure from the inside. They do an incredible job with blitzes, and so they blitz a lot on third down packages. That's going to work really well, and that's kind of how you supplement that. If they get a really good three tech in here at some point, there, that could be really scary.
100%. We'll move on to Pete Dunn's five.
Yeah, a lot of Justin Jolie here. Gonna be my favorite pick, Diamond in year one impact. Like I said, I think he's gonna be really good. Dalen Bentley is gonna be my best value. They got him pretty late, even though it was the second tight end. And then top sleeper, Jonah Coleman. Don't be surprised if he's the RB2 by the end of this year and get in that goal line packages.
Going to be unbelievable to see. I feel the same way about Jonah Coleman as my draft diamond. I think that, wherever he ends up, I'll put it this way. I don't like this draft class at all. With the draft diamond, what it means is best career, player who will develop into a star over time, and a player who will stand out most when we look back in 5 years. I think it's more of stand out most when we look back at it in 5 years, whether he's on this team or not. I just think that he's going to stand out because there's nobody else who stands out. My favorite pick is also going to be Justin Jolie. I just think that with what they want him to do, he can kind of be what Evan Ingram is and what he ultimately really hasn't been as a Bronco. Hopefully he can step up into that spot. There's no value. They've taken absolutely no value in this draft. That's okay. They had 7 picks. They had a lot of those late round picks, no first, no third. They got to kind of do what they got to do ultimately with it. Top sleeper, Dolan Bentley. If you're going to take him, I think that he can be a little bit different from Jolie. Justin Jolie, like Dion said, was more of the receiver type. And I think that when you're taking a defensive tackle as your first pick, he has to be your year one impact. So, Pete, we talked about it earlier, zero roster turnaround over this offseason. Do you expect them to return to the AFC Championship?
Oh, no, I don't think they'll be back at the AFC Championship, but I think they'll be up there. I think this is a team that is going to be ready to compete. I'm not going to rule them out from being in the AFC Championship, but I would not expect them to go that far.
It'll be super interesting to see. We'll talk about a team now that is very used to the AFC Championship, and they had kind of a down year. Hopefully, they'll find a way to make it back up. Of course, it's the Kansas City Chiefs with an excellent, excellent, excellent draft. Another one. Pete Dunn was high on it last year, and man, are we high on it this year. I'm giving it an A. Pete Dunn's giving it an A minus. Look at what they did in the first round with their picks. Of course, that round one, 29th pick, that is, of course, the Trent McDuffie trade. And they end up getting Peter Woods sliding all the way down there. Can't believe it. They take Mansour Delane to literally fill his slot. It's an unbelievable job. Of course, if we're looking at the deal for Trent McDuffie, the Chiefs here, they get Peter Woods, Emmett Johnson. They traded their 6th-round pick that they also got, and they have next year's 3rd-round pick as well. So that's looking like a really good trade. Of course, it's a win-win for both sides. But Pete, enlighten me. You gave it an A minus. Tell me why.
Yeah, it's incredible. These top two picks, top three picks, really, but this first round was a masterclass. You replaced Trent McDuffie, who's going to be really expensive, with a much cheaper Mansour Delane on a rookie contract, and you get your Chris Jones long-term replacement, a guy that is probably a little more developmental, but a guy that in Chris Jones that can develop him. And this is a defensive line that can work around him. Peter Woods is going to be pretty good this year, and I think it'd be really good down the road.
I like Cy Allen. I like Nussmeier here at this spot. You don't know what's going to happen with Mahomes. A lot of really good things from this Chiefs team. I was just talking about it. Let's talk about it really quickly as we go into the depth chart. Patrick Mahomes, they bring in Justin Fields to be that safeguard backup if he's not ready for week one. Nussmeier is there. But of the things you're hearing, are you expecting Mahomes to be ready for week one? What are you expecting when he returns?
Um, I think they want him to be back week one. I think it's going to be Fields week one. I think Fields is going to start. If I had to pulse check this, I think Fields will probably get the ball the first 2 or 3 games of the year. Make sure Mahomes is 100%. With a guy like that, who I think is the best quarterback in the NFL, no question in my mind. You make sure he's back to 100% first. You don't rush an ACL, right? And make sure the guy that is truly that game changing, when he's healthy, you can win 14 games and you can get back to the playoff. Even if Justin Fields goes 0-3. Again, I don't think you would. I think this defense can work around him. I think this offense can work around him. If you give Justin Fields the ball for the first 4 games and he goes 2-2, that's a massive win for this team. And I think he can do that.
Super underrated free agency for this team. Of course, you bring in K9, that's going to be the big headliner. You bring back in L'Jarius Sneed, that's a really good signing. Of course, they bring in Elam, they bring in Gilman, they bring in Fields. You got guys in the secondary. Of course, Jalen Watson was also another guy that was the Chiefs native who ends up going to that Rams team. So, Pete, talk to me about the secondary. What are you expecting out of them this year? Are they going to take a step back? Are they going to kind of stay the same?
Yeah, I mean, you nailed it with McDuffie. It's going to be hard to replace that immediately. Even some of the other guys that they lost in free agency, I think it's going to be really tough. But I think they did a good job of kind of not only getting the headliner with the lane, but the depth behind him. Like Noah Williams was a rookie last year that you were really high on that played well. And then Snead, I think, and Elam even can contribute pretty soon to this roster.
Yeah, I mean, you look at this team unchanged in the wide receiver room. Is this wide receiver room? I feel like we talk about it every year. This is a nightmare for fantasy. I would stay away. There's just, besides Rashee Rice, this is a six-man room as it is every year for these Chiefs teams. They did nothing really to add to it besides bringing in Cy Allen. Thought they would do more. A lot of speed guys, not many of those guys who can really be true receivers. How do you feel about it? And do you think that they can kind of contest with some of the secondaries here in this division?
Yeah, I mean, it's just a lot of question marks, right? Can Xavier Worthy turn into an every down receiver? Can Rashee Rice stay on the field with the off-field issues? Like Jalen Rose, can he take a second year step? I don't know. I don't know any of these things. I will say the one thing I would keep an eye on is Tyreek Hill still has not signed a contract with any team. So do not be surprised if week one Tyreek Hill is on this roster.
It was written on my paper. The next thing I was going to say, Pete, reading my mind out here. I'll ask you this, Pete, big thing here, front four. I want you to give me the front four set up for week one. Who do you think is going to be starting? You have a kind of revolving door here with Carl Loftus. You have R. Mason Thomas now. You know, Omar Norman Lott, it's a guy you really like. Peter Woods is in the mix. Tonga they brought in. Chris Jones. Of course, you have Gigliotti. And of course, Felix. I mean, who do you think here?
That's a good question. I think Omar Norman Lott is kind of going to be that third down guy for right now. I don't think he's an every down player. I think Carl Loftus and Chris Jones are your front two, your two mainstay guys. And then I think Tonga, they signed him for a reason. I think our Mason Thomas squeezes it out. I think he's the other edge rusher.
That'll be super interesting to see. We'll move into Pete Dunn's five.
Yeah, a lot of Mansour Delane here. Favorite pick, draft diamond in year one impact. Really, really high on him. Top 10 player for a reason. Best value, Emmett Johnson. I think he's going to be the RB2 in this scheme immediately. And then sleeper, it says Peter Woods. It's not a sleeper. I think he's going to be the Chris Jones replacement. Don't be surprised if this is a top defensive tackle in a few years.
I can't believe people are sleeping on him, that we are allowed to put him in the sleeper slot. It's an abomination. He is my best value. And only because Mansour Delane is just the perfect fit for all of these. He would be in any of these other slots. But Mansour Delane, I'm telling you, man, he's going to be a Chief for life. He's an unbelievable prospect. He's awesome. I think it's perfect. Great pick by them. But going back to Peter Woods, man, I mean, when you got a guy who's number 13th overall on my board, my number one defensive tackle, and you get him at number 29 in the first round, it's an unbelievable thing. Of course, R. Mason Thomas, like Pete was saying, a very big sleeper on this team. This edge rusher room has never really panned out. They take guys late in the first, late in the second round. You get an R. Mason Thomas in the third. Hopefully, he can bring more to your team. So I'll ask you, Pete, what is a reasonable expectation for the Chiefs in 2026?
Um, I think AFC Championship game, I think is a reasonable expectation. The roster's good enough. If you get Mahomes, if you don't rush him back and he comes back fully healthy, I mean, the sky's the limit for this team. Anytime he's playing quarterback, Super Bowl's in reach. I think AFC Championship is the safest, though.
Unbelievable. This Chiefs team is always someone to be aware of. Now, this Chargers team, I'm not feeling them. I'm not feeling them after this draft, after their free agency. A little bit of a question mark there, but they always find a way to be good. We're looking at it. I gave it a C plus. Pedon's even lower on the C range. So, Pedon, you enlighten the viewers, you enlighten the fans. Tell us why it's a C.
Yeah, I just really didn't love the Akeem Mesidor pick. I've talked about it before. Not a great pass rusher, in my opinion, and pretty one-dimensional. First round pick on that, I think, is a lot. And then I really didn't love what they did after. Slaughter, I think, was interesting. But other than that, I think these are a lot of wasted picks.
Whole lot of nothing here. And you look at obviously what they've done. They've 4 of the last 5 years, they've been over 9 wins, and you're trying to supplement or really trying to get over this hump where you can be looked at as a contender. You have what would be arguably a top five quarterback in the AFC, really good quarterback. You can make a case top five in the NFL in Justin Herbert. And you didn't supplement him well enough. I'm sorry. You're trying to figure out what's going on. You did a decent job in free agency on that interior of the offensive line. But you kind of throw away some picks later with some interior offensive linemen. You bring in a tackle in round four who we haven't heard of. And then I think Genesis Smith is really the only other notable guy besides Slaughter who, they really tried, but I don't think it was a good enough execution. You bring in Brandon Thomas, it's a speed guy. It's very different from what ultimately they have in their wide receiver room. So maybe it can work, but they have so many receivers already. We'll move into their depth chart. Looking at it, I'll go specifically in to that interior offensive line. Peter, and they bring in guys in free agency. They drafted a ton of them. How does this stack up? Of course, we always thought that the bookend tackles in Slater and Alt were pretty solid. So did they do right by just focusing on the interior offensive line?
Yeah, I mean, it's the best tackle duo in the league. I think at this point, I think Joe Alt and Rashawn Slater, I think are absolutely up there. I think Joe Alt is a top three, top five tackle right now, and Rashawn Slater has been that. So I think it's good. They don't need to worry about tackle. I think they need to continue to invest in the interior, though. I don't know if this is good enough for the next few years.
It's funny, man. We talk about how aging this team was on the defensive side of the ball, and you bring in an older guy in Mesidor, and you have Khalil Mack still there. What are you expecting for this edge rusher rotation, if you will? You have Bud Dupree, who's ancient. You have Thule from last year, of course, Khalil Mack, Akeem Mesidor. Who kind of gets the role? Are they in the right spots on this depth chart?
I don't know, man. It's tough. You're really getting nothing out of the interior of that defensive line. And then on the outside, you kind of just have a couple of guys. There's really nothing really explosive about this group. Khalil Mack is old. Akeem Mesidor is one-dimensional and also old. It's just not my favorite, man. It's not my favorite collection of defensive linemen here for sure.
I mean, you of course lost Owe going to the Commanders. Of course, you lost Bosa, and it's just tough to kind of revitalize after that. I hoped it would be a little bit better. We'll talk about a group that got a little bit better this year. That was, of course, the receiver room. Biggest question mark going into last year was Quentin Johnson. I think he actually lived up a little bit more
Yeah.
to what he's ultimately was when they drafted him in the first round. Ladd had a okay up and down year, not as good as that rookie year, but Trey Harris, he's on the horizon. Of these guys, of course, you have more. Brendan Thompson was just added. Of these guys, is there somebody you're looking to make that jump in this receiver room?
I think Loud will settle in again this year, would be my biggest thing there. He had a down year last year, but I trust that he's still the same player. Quentin Johnston, you're right, man. I was impressed with him last year. The resurgence kind of is his career. And then Trey Harris, you kind of get what you get. You're not really expecting a lot, but he could absolutely flash.
We loved Trey Harris coming out. I think he will be the guy. Of course, they added some notable names to this tight end room. How do you dissect Gadsden, Kohler, and Njoku?
Man, I completely forgot they signed David and Njoku. That's really fascinating. Arade Gatson was really flashed early last year and then kind of tailed off. I'm not sure what you're going to get out of him. I think you hope to get that receiving aspect back. If not, you have David and Njoku, a guy who I think can give you one or two more really good years before he kind of ages out of this phase.
And of course, you sign Keaton Mitchell. You bring in a really good fullback in Alec Ingold. I like what they did in the offensive side, not so much on the defensive side. I'll ask you, Pete, of the free agents, do you have a favorite free agent addition or signing?
Yeah, I'm gonna say David Njoku. I think that's pretty sick. I think he can absolutely take over that tight end room. Wasn't as great last year in Cleveland, but I think can return to that form with what is kind of an open-ish room right now.
It's just receivers galore for Justin Herbert. He's got weapons everywhere. They revitalized the line. Hopefully, this means that he can really have maybe an MVP type season like they're hoping him to have. We'll move on to Pete Dunne's five.
Yeah, a lot of Jake Slaughter here, kind of the main pick that's carrying this draft because I wasn't a big Mesidor guy. So I think, whether they play him at center or guard, I think it's still up in the air. Obviously, played center at Florida. Looks like they're playing him guard here for the Charger, I think should be interesting. Going to be really good anyway. Mesidor is going to be the year one impact. He better be with the way that they drafted him. And then best value, Nick Barrett down the board, penetrating three tech, I think can be really good. And then sleeper. Sleeping on Genesis Smith, I think that guy can be awesome.
It'd be really cool to see. I kind of feel the same way about Jake Slaughter being the draft time, and I think he's going to fit super well. Unfortunately, there's no value here. They kind of reached on everybody, and I'm not the biggest fan of kind of what they did. They could have had a lot better players, if you will, at the spots that they kind of drafted, but I do think that they drafted good for the team needs. So I like the process. We talked about this in previous episodes. I like the process. I don't like the execution, but at least that's where you want to be. You don't want to be like the Dolphins where, you don't like the execution and the process, but then you end up stumbling upon some good players. You don't want to be there. So I'd rather take the process and trust the development side of a Akeem Mesidor, if you will, or a Jake Slaughter than anything else. I do think Nick Barrett in that very weak kind of interior of that defensive line can actually play a super good role. I'll ask you this, Pete, on how did the Chargers become Super Bowl contenders? Are they favorites in the AFC West? Can they potentially win the AFC West? Did they do enough this offseason?
Um, I don't think so. I think this is the third team that I would guess to win this division. But again, it's so tight between those top three that I think they could make a run. It would need to be a step back from Bo Nix and a unhealthy season from Mahomes, I think, for them to make this happen. But is there a chance? Yes, it would need to be a really good Herbert year though.
Well-coached team, really good quarterback. They're always going to be in the mix. They have them at 10.5 wins. We'll move on here to this kind of last segment of this draft cycle. As we look at the 10.5 win mark for that Chargers team, we'll start off with the win totals. How about that? We'll go 10.5 for this Chargers team. Pete, are you going over or under?
I would take the under slightly on this team. I do not think that they're going to be winning 11 games. I would be absolutely shocked if they ended this season at 11-6.
Vegas going really high on their totals to the point where they have them tied with the Chiefs, which is crazy to me. 10.5 over under. I'm going over on the Chiefs. Pete, what are you doing?
Yeah, hammering the over here. Y'all know how I did it last year. Super Bowl. It might happen again. I don't know. We'll see by midseason, but definitely going to take the over on 10.5.
It's going to be super interesting to see. 9.5 is the totals for this Broncos team. Pete, what would you do here?
Definitely taking the over here too. It's a really good defense. I know they didn't add a lot in the draft, but you got to imagine, like, we didn't really talk as much about that earlier. Like, that first round pick went to Waddle, right? So, like, you do have to compensate that. They got what I think is, one of the more underrated receivers in the NFL. I think, like I said before, I think this can be a top 10 guy, true alpha number one. They added that. I think they're going to be over here.
The offense was really the only setback. They had the great defense. I think they actually added with Waddle a whole nother dimension because their offensive line is sick. Their defense is sick. You're going to get Bo Nix, hopefully even better. Hopefully that running back room is a little bit more healthy. And now you got a little bit more weapons for Bo Nix. I think it's going to be really good. I'm also going to go over 9.5. We'll go to the last team here, the Las Vegas Raiders. They're at 5.5. This is a tough line, Pete. What are you thinking?
It's tough because I think this is a roster that I would take the 5.5 over. Just unfortunately, not in this division. I think the time could be coming. I like some of the moves that the Raiders have been making lately. I just don't think it's this year.
Yeah, underrated defense. Offense in terms of wide receivers is going to be their
Oof. Yeah.
biggest whole issue. It's going to be terrible. We'll look at the offseason winners and losers before we close it out. Pete Dunn, who is your offseason winner in the AFC West?
It's going to be the Chiefs for me. Incredible first round and really did good down the board behind that. I gave it an A minus. You gave it an A. Got to be the winner.
100%. And then the loser. Is there a loser?
Um, I'll go Broncos just because I really didn't love their draft. Again, we have to compensate the Waddle addition. I don't know if there's a true loser in this division, but I guess the technically worst one would have to be the Broncos for me.
Yeah, I would be teetering between that Chargers team as well. I actually think the Raiders had a really good offseason. I will go slight Broncos here. And that'll be it. That'll be it for Division Draftables 2026 edition. This was episode 8, episode 70 of the cycle. We thank you guys so much for being with us throughout. It's been an absolute blast to cover the NFL for 70 episodes on the brand new podcast. I'm going to be back at it next year very soon, starting, of course, when training camp starts. You'll see more videos rolling out. And then, of course, going throughout the season, following it with us through all of our snap counts. Before you know it, we'll be back here on the podcast for the draft guys to cover the 2027 NFL draft. We're going to see pop-up videos all over the YouTube. May not be posted as much on the podcast because the draft may be over, but you definitely want to stay tuned for this elite draft class we have. Pete, what do you got to say to everybody?
Crazy that it's over. What a off season, what a draft. Couldn't have had much more fun. A really, really great 2026 cycle. So super grateful for everybody that stayed tuned with us. You definitely got to be back for next year. It's gonna be a crazy one.
We're only growing. Check out the shorts, check out the reels. They're pumping out every single day. A lot of content coming your way, even in the dead months of the off season. So you're definitely going to want to check it out. We thank you guys so much for tuning in from the draft guys, from Niko the Draft Guy. So long. See you later, and we'll see you next summer.